beer here at the Carolina Brewery. Beer's been around for about 5,000 years, and it's a really good, nourishing beverage, and we're proud to be part of the craft brewing movement in the United States. When we started out in Chapel Hill in 1995, we were one of the first breweries in the area. We were now the oldest brewery in the Triangle. We started off in Chapel Hill, and then 3 years ago we opened this brewery here in Pittsburgh, and we've been expanding our sales of beers and our distribution, and so that was the need for this new brewery. I'll show you around if you like.
Awesome.
I'm going to start off at the beginning and go to the end.
Sounds great.
Someone here, he's taking out the mash. We're brewing some beer today.
Okay. So what is this thing?
This is the malted barley. We make the beer with pretty much malted barley as the main ingredient. We add some hops to the boiling of the beer, and then of course it ferments with yeast. But this is the body and the soul of the beer right here. This is malted barley, and this is what we extract sugar out of to make our beer.
So once the brew is finished and we've rinsed all the goodness out of the malt, then this is now goes to a local farmer, and he's got cows and pigs, and he feeds his animals with it.
Yeah, so they eat that.
Yeah, they eat that. It's still very nutritious, a lot of protein in it. But not much more beer flavor left, so we're done with it for today.
About how much of it do you need to get maybe a keg of beer?
A keg of beer, well, let me think for a minute. I mean, in a typical batch here, we might be using 1,000 pounds of malt, and 1,000 pounds will make 30 kegs.
Okay.
So that's what we do here. Up here's our brew kettle. You can see the beer's boiling hot up there. We can take a look if you want to look inside the kettle.
Okay.
Here at the moment. Yeah, this thing is I think the beer's actually stopped boiling already too, so not too much to look at.
Yeah, I think it's
Looks like mostly just steam in there.
steam.
Okay. And then here's the top of this thing you were looking in before. The rest of the stuff. It takes just about all day to actually produce a liquid that will become beer after it ferments. So we come in the morning. The tank on the right hand side over there is what we call a hot liquor tank. That's got hot water in it. And here's the mash tun. So up above it we have the grist case, and the grist is all the malts combined. Grist comes into the mash tun, gets mixed with warm water, and then it's going to stay in there for like an hour. And what happens there is that there's enzymes in the malts that will convert starches into sugar, and then the sugar is ultimately what we're going to be making alcohol and carbon dioxide out of. And those are the two things that are really good in beer. The fizz and the alcohol is good. Once it's been in here for about an hour, then what we want to do now is rinse those sugars out of the malt and fill the kettle up. So we take the hot water, we rinse through the malt, then we pump it into the kettle, and then once the kettle's full, that's when we start adding hops to the beer. And we use different varieties of hops. We use American hops and German hops and English hops, and depending on what style of beer we're making, depends on which types of hops we use. Typically, I like to have balanced beer, so as we put more malt into a beer, we put more hops into the beer as well. So for a nice hoppy American type pale ale, like our Firecracker or our Bullpen or our India Pale Ale, we use a lot more hops than we would in our Sky Blue Golden Ale, which is actually a German style ale.
Great. What is it that you add in to make it a lighter versus a darker beer?
I can show you some of the malts that we have over here. It's the malts that affect that. Most malts, when they start out, are this pale sort of color that you see in there. And then there's some other different kinds of malts. And one kind is called a caramel malt. And what caramel is some sugar in the malt that through a process makes that particular malt the sugar more difficult for the yeast to digest. So during fermentation, when the yeast is consuming the sugar, if you want to have some residual sweetness left in the beer, then if you use caramel malt, you'll have some sugar left in there. And also caramel malts add that nice red color and the nice darker color to stouts and porters as well. And I can show you the actual malts. We have some samples in the back too. Go back this way.
Cool.
There's a nice look at all the malts together. Make a nice colorful presentation there. Pretty much the beers, most beers are made out of this malt, which is the pale malt. That actually is the kind of malt that will produce alcohol, and that's really nice. Now, other things that you can put into beer to add really good flavor too is oats. We have some oats in here. This is just similar to oats that you would eat for breakfast. Oats add a nice silky texture to beer, makes it a nice creamy mouthfeel, and it also makes for a nice head retention on the beer, so it makes a nice thick rocky head. Here's wheat. Wheat will do similar types of things as well, but also what's good about wheat is that it has really a light flavor. So when you're making a beer where the emphasis is on yeast flavor, like a Hefeweizen for instance, you don't want a lot of malt flavor. You want a nice clean crisp beer, and then you can really get the fruity esters, which is what wheat beers are. You get banana, strawberry, all kinds of great flavors out of those. So, same with what I was talking about the hops too, is that in those kinds of beers you wouldn't want a lot of hops either. You don't want to compete with these different flavors. This is that caramel malt. Caramel malt adds that nice red hue that you see in amber-colored beers, and also in stouts and porters it contributes the color there. Though when we're talking about stouts and porters, we're usually talking about these roasted malts. This particular malt here is a chocolate malt. We also use black malt and roasted barley, and they're very similar. They add color and some roasty flavors to the beer. These types of malts are just made out of these, only roasted in an oven. So when you eat these, they sort of have that flavor of the little burnt parts on an English muffin. So they're very nice and crunchy and roasty. And then I can show you over here. This is another important ingredient in the beer. This is my little yeast doll. And yeast are an amazing thing in beer. There's 6 million of these yeast cells in a milliliter of beer, which is, a milliliter is like 1,000th of a quart. So these are very active. So long as you feed them well and treat them nice, they're like a pet, and they'll be good to you, and they'll produce really good beer. When they are well taken care of, they will make these little buds and make little daughter cells, and then these will become big yeast cells as well. And then each generation we can take that yeast at the end of the fermentation and use that yeast again, similar to how you do with like a sourdough bread starter or something like that. Needless to say, this is not actual size. It's a lot bigger. Okay, I'll show you what else we got back here. This is our malt room. We're not cracking any malt at the moment, but if we were, we'd be putting it into here. Cracks the grains up, and then they travel up through this copper pipe over here and go over to the brewery.
Cool.
These are some of our ingredients too. You can see we use nice German malts and malts from England. Nice stuff. And we're getting another shipment of malt tomorrow, so this is kind of the end of the line. Usually we have a lot more malt.
How much malt do you put for in a week?
Well, last week, for instance, we brewed actually, I think we brewed 7 times in a row. So in that particular week, we would have gone through like 7,000 pounds of malt. So, we're brewing almost every day, and when we're not brewing, we're moving beer around, filtering beer, and so on. So, see what else.
Stuff up close.
So you guys live in a lot of places. Yeah, you know, sometimes I forget because I've been in a brewery like every day for, you know, over 15 years, and you get used to thinking that everybody understands what all this stuff is, but it is interesting still.
Yeah.
I got into brewing because I really love beer, and I love the flavor of beer, and so I'm never tired of it. And I like all my beers that I make. They're like children to me, so I don't really have a favorite. And you know, usually whichever's the newest is my new favorite for a while. These are the kegs that we're going to be sending out to Darryl's right here. This is where we clean them, fill them. I don't know if the lens will fog it.
Oh, yeah.
The beer in this room is the finished beer, so after it's fermented in there, we filter most of the beers except like the German Hefeweizen styles, where you're getting a lot of flavor from the yeast. And then once the beer's finished, we put it into these tanks, and from these tanks, it goes directly to the bar over here, or we can keg it off on the other side and send it out to our wholesale accounts.
Do they have to be kept at a certain temperature?
Colder the better. Beer is a perishable product, so the colder you keep it and the darker you keep it, the better off it is. And these tanks, you know, they're basically like big kegs in a way. They're full of CO2, so when you take oxygen away from beer, the beer stays fresh. But like any fruit product, if it gets oxidized, then it can get stale. So try to keep it at its peak of freshness, and basically that means once the beer is finished brewing and fermenting in there, we'll move into this room. I guess we didn't really talk about the fermenters. Do you want to talk about those and what happens to the beer after it leaves the brewery? Hooked up here, I can show you. The beer is leaving the kettle now, and of course the beer is boiling hot, and the yeast is alive, so the boiling beer would be too hot to kill the yeast if we put it directly in the tank. So we have a heat exchanger here that will cool the beer down to room temperature. The beer is leaving the kettle, going through this hose, and we can follow it over here and show you where it's going. So here you can see that the beer is going into the tank. We put it through the bottom. Before we add the beer, we will open up the door that you see up here and add the yeast through this door, and then mix it with the beer. Coming back right here, I'll show you. I have some fermenting beer. Here we have some active fermenting going on here. We made this beer yesterday, so you can see that the yeast is consuming that sugar, making lots of carbon dioxide. And we have it bubbling into a bucket just to keep the air from here from getting inside the tank. So it's just one way. Stuff can only come out of the tank, so it keeps the beer nice and fresh inside. This is going to go on for maybe, you know, up to a week, sometimes longer, depending on what style, sometimes shorter. The warmer the fermentation, shorter and more rapid this happens. Once the bubbling is coming in, like you see on this beer here, we know fermentation is complete, and then we can chill these tanks down. So you see this tank's nice and cold. When the tank is chilled, the yeast go into hibernation, drop into the cone of the tank, and then this is where we crop the yeast for the next brew from the bottom of the tank.
Okay.
But it's molten.
And then this is the second step. And then the third step is the one where you, the temperature exchange. Okay, and then it goes over there, and then it comes here to ferment. Okay.
So when we designed this brewery, it was basically to have this flow. So you start at one end, and then the finished product is in the cooler down there. So that's pretty much how